All right. First, hey everybody. First off, of course, I need to say hello to everyone. But today I am. You'll notice it's a little different setup. I am out of breath because I just had to drag the dog into jail, so to speak, because she was acting up. But I wanted to apologize to everyone because today I will not be able to show pictures. I'm on my phone. The computer is being fixed right now, and we hope to have that remedied in the next week or so, or week or two. And I've already spoken with Mr. Barry today, and he shared some photos with me and PowerPoint presentation. And once we get that fixed, he's going to come back and he's going to be gracious enough to talk about some of the amazing photos that he took and that he's got. So with me apologizing right off the bat and all of that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our guest, Marine Corps Aviator, Cobra pilot, uh, veteran of Operation Tailwind, Mr. Barry Penchek. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Bud. Thanks for asking me. Uh, you were asking me how I came about to get in the military, so I'll start at the beginning. I just grew up in a coal mining town in Pennsylvania, a city that was sort of dying, was the mines closed, but didn't really have any direction where I wanted to go. Uh, Always used to like playing. We called it up the dumps, playing in the coal dumps, play army and stuff like that. So I think that military kind of gets ingrained in your brain as a little kid. Maybe there's something to that. But anyhow, I was a senior in high school, and a friend of mine who was a couple years older came in, and he was on Christmas leave from the Marine Corps. He was 19 years old, and he was in flight school in Pensacola, and he was telling me about it. And I said, "That's the greatest thing you can do with your clothes on." So that's what I want to do. Of course, I went the next week to see the Marine recruiter, and they laughed at me and said, "You have to go to college to be a pilot." So uh, I ended up going to a small school in Kentucky. And then my friend Pete was in this Marine cadet program, and they did away with that. So I had to graduate from college and, spend the four years before I could go. Ended up going to Pensacola. And Bud and I were talking earlier about the difference between Army helicopter pilots and Marine helicopter pilots when it comes to the training. In Pensacola, you become what they refer to, you're a naval aviator. And to do that, back in those days, they wanted you to hit the boat. That means land on an aircraft carrier. So most of the uh, training was done in fixed wing aircraft. We started out in a T-34. You got your basic aerodynamics and your basic flying and stuff. Then, depending on the needs of the service and your class standing, you would go either a helicopter pipeline, a jet pipeline, or a multi-engine pipeline. Well, in those days, about 95% of people were going to the helicopter program. So when you did that, it still entailed fixed wing flying. It was a T-28, and with that, we got instruments and acrobatics and all this other stuff, and we did carrier qualifications, landing on an aircraft carrier, so you could get your wings of gold, as the naval aviators call them. It was only in the last 3 months of 1 year of training that I went into helicopters. And you just become kind of familiar with the helicopters, and then you get shipped off to a squadron where you get fully trained and get a helicopter MOS, your military occupational specialty. And I ended up in a Huey squadron. So the difference between the Naval Flight School and the Army is that when you go into the Army, you just, as a helicopter pilot, you only fly helicopters. So when you come out of Army Flight School, you've got 9 months of helicopter flying, probably 250 to 300 hours of helicopter time, where I had a lot more fixed wing time and just a little bit of helicopter time. Of course, I was fully instrument rated when you go through the naval flight training. And in the Army, you get a tactical instrument card, which means, you can save your life if you fly into a cloud, kind of thing. So you could, there's arguments go back and forth about the better pilots, and they're all good pilots. But just out of flight school, an Army helicopter pilot has a whole lot more helicopter time than a Marine or Navy helicopter pilot. Though you could argue someone that graduated from Pensacola is a more accomplished aviator because you have the instrument rating and you landed on a boat. But anyhow, at the time, there was such a need for helicopter pilots in the Marine Corps that a bunch of people were sent to Army flight school, and they go to Fort Walters, Texas, and then up to Mother Rucker in Alabama, and just go through the Army pipeline. And it was a really good deal for them because while they're there, they got per diem every day, something like $16 a day. And boy, when I hooked up with some friends later on, and they had a chunk of change in their pockets where I didn't, because they went to this temporary duty to be trained with the Army. But anyhow, long story short, ended up in Vietnam at a place called Marble Mountain. It was a little air facility, a short runway just east of Da Nang, right on the South China Sea. There's a white sandy beach. Of course, we couldn't get any beach time because it's covered with concertina wire for the most part. But that's where I was assigned to a Cobra squadron, which might seem a little odd because I had a Huey MOS. But the way it worked, there was only one Cobra squadron in the whole Marine Corps. The Army was huge compared to the Marine Corps. We had one Cobra squadron, so there was no training group back in the States. It was just the one at Marble Mountain. So my friend, a buddy of mine, went through flight school with Joe Driscoll. He and I checked in at the same time, go to the colonel's office at the group, and they to be welcomed aboard. And he gives us the standard speech. And then he says, "Where do you want to go?" And Joe says, "We want to go to the Cobra squadron." And he says, "Okay." It seems kind of odd, but Hueys and Cobras have about 85% commonality. When they built the Cobra, they just basically took a Huey, changed the fuselage, same skids, same engine, same rotor system, same tail rotor, tail boom, all that. They just changed the fuselage, put tandem seating, moved some stuff around. So there was about 85% commonality, and a lot of the pilots coming in the country were just getting on the job training anyhow. So you get OJT, go to the squadron, and that's the first time I'd ever seen a Cobra or rode in a Cobra. The first flight I had was a maintenance hop, just so I got in the front seat, just so I could, get familiar with it. And it seemed strange because instead of having a standard stick between your legs with the, collective on the left, you had these two little levers. The sick, or the cyclic is what they call it. The stick in the front of the Cobra is only about this long. Because you have this big sight that controls the turret, you don't have room for a standard stick between your legs like in most aircraft. So anyhow, first hop I got was a maintenance hop to get familiar with it. Next hop, they said I needed an instrument check. Well, I wasn't qualified to get in the back where the instruments were, so I put on this little hood over my helmet, and I shot a radar controlled approach. He said, "Don't peek." And I said, "Right, I won't peek." And did one landing. He says, "Okay, your instrument currency is renewed for a year." And third hop I got, I'm in the front seat, and it's we had this Mission 80, we called it. It was standby guns, and somebody got in trouble, and they say launch. So we launch. I'm with a guy named Sid Baker, and we get I climb in the front, and as we turned down this river after we took off, and he says, "Okay, test the guns." And I'm saying, "Okay, how do I do that?" I mean, I had 2 hops in the thing, absolutely knew nothing about it. So it took us 20 minutes. He's saying, "Oh, here's how you pull this pin, and you do that to get the sight loose and pull this trigger." And so I tested the guns, and then we get down to the Quezon Mountains, where there was a shootout going on. And the way we usually use it, we always flew in sections, which means 2. And 2 sections would be a division, 4 aircraft. We always flew at least 2. And you'd have one guy come off the perch and roll in. Pardon me, I always talk with my hands. I'm an aviator. Anyhow, you roll in and you pull off the target and from shooting rockets. And then as you pull off before you got the target, the guy in the front seat's using the turret to keep their heads down. Meanwhile, your wingman's 180 degrees out, and he would be rolling in off the perch to deliver rockets. So you tried to say 180 degrees out. So on this, I'm flying with Sid, and he shoots some rockets, and then I open up with the turret, and he's saying, good shooting, good shooting. Oh, way to go, way to go. And all I saw was a mountain with a lot of bomb craters. I didn't see a person, because I learned then it takes a while to develop the eye, to get the experience to where you see movement, you see the people on the ground and all that. I had like 5 hours of, not even 5 hours in the Cobra, probably 4 hours in the Cobra. So it was kind of funny, but Sid saying, oh, you're doing a great job, great shooting, great shooting. I was just shooting it at the side of a mountain. But as time went on, you get checked out in the aircraft and eventually move to the back seat, and then you become a section leader and division leader and all those things. The missions I could talk a little about. This is not Tailwind related, and the missions that we usually did, we did a lot of. We'd always escort Marine transport helicopters, so if we have a resupply, it was very boring. You'd pick up a CH-46 and they'd go to point A and they'd pick up a load of beans, bullets, and bandages or whatever. And then you'd escort them and they'd go out to this LZ and you drop it off. Then you come back, pick up another and go to point B, another point C, and stuff like that. Well, there's an old saying in aviation that it's hours and hours of boredom interrupted by moments of stark terror. And how that goes on a resupply day where it's really boring flying. You just flying along, get the zone brief, take them in. Just once in a while, you're going in with the 46 to cover them, and all of a sudden the skies open up and everybody's shooting at you. But that always came as a surprise. Most missions that we went on, with the exception of resupply, we expended ordnance. Other missions that we had were troop inserts and extracts. They could be either hot or cold. You might just be putting in hundreds of troops for a sweep through a valley or something, and there's no shots fired. And other times you're putting them in, and it's what we used to refer to as a shit sandwich. It would get hot. And then extractions the same way. We'd also do, when troops were on the ground and in contact, we'd do close-in fire support. And the biggest thing there is you had to have good comm, and your biggest worry was you had to know where the good guys were and the bad guys were. So you had to have comm and you had to know the situation, because nothing's worse than being there and seeing a bunch of Marines in trouble and you can't talk to anybody and you can't do anything because you can't deliver any ordnance because you don't know who's who and who's where. So I'd say the biggest fear that most of our pilots had was the fear of failure. If you don't do your job, then Marines are going to die or could possibly die, and other Americans. So comm was a very important thing. We also did recon insert and extracts, which were just sort of like SOG, but on this side of the fence in Vietnam. We put in recon teams, 3 guys and maybe a few indige, small teams, 6, 7, 8 people. And kind of like when we'd go across the fence with SOG, you'd put them in, and then if there was no contact, great, they'd blend into the woods. If there was, you might have to do an emergency extract. But oftentimes we'd land, say, at 3 different zones, so you wouldn't, that people are watching. The NVA used to watch, and they had radios too. So you'd come in and maybe do a landing in one LZ, and nobody gets out. The next one, team gets out, and you go to a third one just to confuse the enemy a little bit. You used to do that on recon team inserts. We also would do medevac missions where you just escort a 46 with the corpsman on board. And medevacs were classified. The Navy corpsmen that were with the Marine troops on the ground would classify them as either routine, priority, or emergency. During the day, we'd go out for any kind of medevac, and they might be in contact and it's a firefight, and you got to go in and get them out and suppress the fire. And other times it might not be hot at all. I mean, somebody could have tripped and broke an ankle. It could be something as simple as that. But at night, one of the more exciting missions we had was night medevac. And I sent Bud some pictures. One was our medevac bunker. We only launched for emergency medevacs at night because this is a day before night vision goggles. So it was just black out there. You couldn't see. There might be some lightning or something. It was very, very dark, especially in the monsoon season with overcast skies. And what we usually had to rely on was a flare ship, and there'd be an Air Force C-130, excuse me, overhead, and they'd have a loadmaster kicking out flares. These were, I guess they were yay big around and this long, maybe weighed 30 or 40 pounds, and they'd push them out the back of the 130, and a parachute come out, and they burn for about 210 seconds at 1,000,000 candle power. So it could light up a whole area, like, a few grid squares. You could light it up, but it was an eerie sort of light. And as the flare would fall, the shadows would get longer. Well, you always wanted to make sure they kept constant light on the target. If they didn't, on the LZ where you're going in, because if one of the flares didn't ignite, it could go black like that, and all of a sudden it's just darker than a well digger's ass, and you don't know what's going to happen. So that was pretty exciting. Flying was night medevac, one of the more exciting. The way the mission ran, just to back up a little, we had this medevac bunker, and it was just a room full of bunks of cots. And you'd lay there sleeping with your boots on and everything. And there was a Marine at the door with a table and a radio. And if all the aircraft would be 240 CH-46s, which is like a mini Chinook, if you're not familiar with it. It's like a smaller version of a Chinook, which is a CH-47, but it only has 3 wheels instead of 4 on the landing gear. Anyhow, all the aircraft are pre-flighted and ready to go down to the point of pulling the starter trigger, turning on the battery, pull the starter trigger. So if the radio went off, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, everybody jumps out of bed, runs for the door. The pilots in command and the crew chiefs all run for the door, and the co-pilots would stop at the table, and you get the name of the unit, frequency they're on, and the location, the coordinates of the unit. Excuse me. So you could generally, once that radio went and they about an emergency medevac, we'd usually have the 4 aircraft launched in, I'd say, 1.5 to 2 minutes at the most. It was that quick. And then you just bust out, and I mean, you might have been sound asleep 4 minutes ago, and now you're flying out into the darkness and hope the flare ship's out there to meet you when there's no moon and it's a monsoon season. But we did that. And then, of course, the other mission was going across the fence. Now, by 1970, there wasn't a whole lot of that going on. They had what was called Vietnamization. Nixon ran against on a platform of winding down the Vietnam War. So we were sending lots of troops home, and there wasn't near as much SOG activity as there had been. But we'd still go across the fence now and then. And when you go across the fence, it was a little different in that, a little silly or stupid, if you ask me. We had to go sterile. So no dog tags, no wallets, no pictures of your wife or girlfriend, no letters, nothing on you to identify who you were, as if you're going to fool somebody that you're not an American. I mean, I don't know how that's going to. If you get shot down, you crash. Here's this, or if I get captured, I'm a round-eyed white guy, and I don't speak Vietnamese or Lao, and I'm supposed to say what I'm really Vietnamese. I don't. It seems kind of stupid to me, but anyhow, that's what we had to do. You had to go sterile, and then we get briefs with the special operators, the SOG guys, launch and go across the border. Most of the stuff that I did by 1970 was a resupply on a radio relay operation we had going on across the border on a hilltop. But then came in September of 70, we got orders to go down to what's called 2 Corps. Vietnam was divided into 4 corps, 1, 2, 3, 4 Roman numerals. And that was in the Central Highlands, and we were going down to work with the Army, which is really a kind of an odd situation because we always stayed in our area of operation. And this became, background. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is where the North Vietnamese brought all their people down to infiltrate into South Vietnam to support the insurgency. They were also fighting the governments in Laos and Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge and the insurgents in Laos also. Khmer Rouge, they were called. Khmer Rouge and whatever the hell they were. Anyhow, that was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It started out as basically in 1959 as just a trail. This has been going on for a long time. But by 1970, it was kind of an engineering marvel. They had gravel roads that you could drive trucks on. They would build bridges maybe like a foot below the water crossing a creek. They'd build the bridge so you couldn't see it from the air, but trucks could go across. They'd clear a roadway, and then they'd climb the trees and rope together the canopy so it covered everything. They had 6 different pipelines carrying diesel and gasoline, and they had telecommunication lines. It was a sophisticated thing, and it wasn't just one road. It was a whole network to go for the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was a big thing. Well, what happened back in, I think it was 65, the U.S. kind of got asked to leave, got thrown out of Cambodia. Both the governments of Laos and Cambodia were walking a tightrope saying, oh, we have diplomatic relations with North and South Vietnam. We're not pro either one. We're maintaining neutrality. But it was, all just a front because we weren't there. The North Vietnamese say they weren't there, but by 1970, they had somewhere close to 90,000 troops in Laos defending the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we would send people in all the time, but everybody said they weren't there. So what happened, the leader of South Vietnam the leader of Cambodia opened up Cambodia to the North Vietnamese communists. And they built another trail system called the Sihanouk Trail. Well, 70% of all the supplies, not the people, but the supplies for the war in Vietnam came by a ship all the way around the country in international waters, would go into Port Sihanoukville and use the Sihanouk Trail. That's where that 70% of all the heavy stuff came. Well, Prince Sihanouk was overthrown, and all of a sudden that was shut off, the Sihanouk Trail. So the communists, the NVA, had to press westward from where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was, go to the west, so they could get control of what was called the Sekong River, which flowed into the Mekong River, and then they would use the waterway as their new supply for heavy equipment. And the CIA had a whole bunch of outposts overlooking the Sekong, and the NVA overran those and took control of it. So back in the White House, Henry Kissinger and this group he had came up with an idea for a big operation, and it was called Operation Gauntlet. It was 5,700 mercenaries led by the CIA to recapture all these CIA sites so they could have control of the Sekong River. And then they needed some help from the military. We needed to provide a diversion and a blocking force so people from the Ho Chi Minh Trail couldn't get over. So generally, SOG was always limited to operating within 20 clicks of the border, 20 kilometers. And they couldn't go any deeper than that. So this was a kind of special mission. It was, we got permission to go deeper into Laos, and it was going to be instead of a small recon team like most of these guys you've probably listened to, where you have 2 or 3 Americans and a few Montagnards. This was going to be 120 Montagnards and 16 Green Berets. It was a company-size operation, and it became known as Operation Tailwind. So we were supposed to put them in on September 4th, and the weather was bad. So we waited till the 7th and went down on the 7th, and we got the brief. And we spent the night there. And then after the next morning, we went out. The plan was to pontoons in the Central Highlands, and we would load up and go out to another base that was outlying near the border called Dak To. It was just a small patch of scraped earth with some bunkers and stuff. And we'd go to Dak To, wait for the weather to break so we could make it across the border into Laos. So we went to Dak To, and we sat there, and we sat and sat and sat for hours, and overstayed our welcome. And you don't have any of the pictures, so I'm kind of describing something. I wish you could see it, but I was on the roof of a bunker catching some rays with a guy named Pt.1, and we're sitting there, looking around, and all of a sudden, all these mortars start going off. So we jumped down, and we went into this bunker, and I took a picture, which is, I wonder. Anyhow, it's on the. I don't know if you can see it. It's on the cover of the book. Mm-hmm. Well, I took that picture, and I had these slides for 50 years. And if some buddies would come by, every 5 years or something, might break them out and we'd look at them. I suppose I looked at them 5 or 6 times in 50 years and never noticed. But on the picture, there's this guy running along the fence, and never noticed it till I start researching and writing this book. And I got contacted by this one guy who was a Pink Panther, and his name's Pete Gotch. And he says, I'm in that slide. And I looked, and by God, there he was. So I used that on the cover of the book. But anyhow, the one Army Cobra got blown apart, and we all ran and got in our birds and launched, and couldn't find the bad guys. And we had to cancel the mission for the day. We had another bird that was damaged. We had to external it back, hoisted under a PH-53. It was battle damaged, and we're going to try the next day. This was the 8th, so we were gonna. Next day, the weather was bad. We had gone back to Marble Mountain, and then it was the 9th, and the weather's still bad. We couldn't get in. So then on the 10th, they called us, said we're going to go on the 11th, and we went down there. In the morning of the 11th, we loaded up again, went out to Dak To, and this time the weather was sufficient. We could get in. Now, the thing you got to remember, in the monsoon seasons, it rains for about 6 months, and that panhandle of Laos gets from 120 to 140 inches of rain in the wet season. Now, that's our annual, but there's a dry season and a wet season. Most of it comes in the wet season. So you have low clouds, and it's mountainous. So that's why, as much as you'd like to go, sometimes the weather's just too bad and we couldn't get in. So finally, on the 11th, we went to Dak To. There was a covey bird. I don't know if you've heard that term before. It's an Air Force forward air controller, and in his front seat would be an experienced SOG, special forces guy, and he'd be talking to the grunts on the ground, and the controller, the FAC covey, would be talking to the fast movers or whoever, or other aviation assets. Anyhow, they said the weather's sufficient, we can come in, and we started flying. And it was we usually try to stay at 1,500 feet to stay above small arms fire, and you just fly along at 1,500 feet. But the weather was down, so we had to get lower and lower. And of course, every once in a while, people are shooting at you, and tracers come up. Well, 2 or 3 yards got hit just en route. We hadn't even started the mission yet, and they couldn't offload because they were wounded. But the Pathfinder team some guys went in the Hueys. I think there were 7, maybe 3 SF guys and 4 Indig, and they landed and they said, quiet as a church, no problem, bring them on in. So we had CH-53s, which are a big Marine transport helicopter, and we had the troops on 4 53s. And then we had 6 birds altogether at the time, 6 53s. 2 were search and rescue SAR in case somebody gets shot down. So the first one comes in, everything's supposed to be quiet as a church. First one comes in and the place opens up. They didn't shoot at the Pathfinders, but the hills are alive with all these people shooting at us. And it turned into a shit sandwich. Then the second one came in and unloaded his packs, and the third and the fourth, and it got heavier and heavier with each one. Everybody gets shot up. We got our radio shot out and some other stuff. And my friend Joe, same thing with them. So we had 4 Cobras, and 2 of them were without radios. But anyhow, we left. And Gene McCarley, who was Captain Gene McCarley, was the commander of B Company, the SOG hatchet force. He said when we left, he said the jungle just got quiet as a mouse, quiet as a church again. He said they were kind of on the hills, and we landed in an open area, and they were shooting everything they had. But SOG's mission, or their game plan then, Gene McCarley's tactics, was to be a game of cat and mouse, and he was going to keep his troops moving. And the NBA were trying to catch him, so they didn't know where he was going, and it was a cat and mouse situation. It worked okay. They went about 500 yards, and on day 1, on the 11th, they came upon this bunker complex. And they enter this bunker complex, and it's like a storage. There's 25 bunkers lined up, and it's full of ammunition, rockets, 23 millimeter ammunition and mortars and everything else. There's whole bunkers loaded with it. There's a bunker of bicycles. There's one's an office, and these I think it was 1st platoon goes in on the hatchet force, and they go into this one bunker, and the phone rings, and I think it was Craig Schmidt, an SF guy. So the story goes, he picks up the phone and says, "Hello, good afternoon, 5th Special Forces Group." He hung up on the other end. That didn't go so well. But there was a picture of Ho Chi Minh on the wall that Schmidt took. And then they got their demo guys, and they wired up all 20 or 25 bunkers, whatever they were, with det cord and plastic explosives. Put a 15-minute timer on it, and they started heading out, and it started blowing. And they said that like 6 hours later, they were still getting explosions going off in the area. So that got the NVA's attention and kind of pissed them off about a bit. The one problem that the hatchet force ran into is that they were taking casualties. There was a RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, landed in a bamboo thicket right next to Gene McCarley, and his medic was a guy named Mike Rose, Sergeant Mike Rose, and there were some other guys. It blew up and threw them up in the air and wounded them and gave them bamboo shrapnel and everything. And there were some yards that were wounded, and Mike and the 2nd platoon was in charge of all the casualties, and it was slowing them down. So they had 1 dead, and then the next day they had a 2nd KIA. And when you're playing a game of cat and mouse, you have to be mobile and you have to be able to move, and it was really slowing them down. So Mike made the decision he had to leave two bodies behind, 2 yards that really bothered him. But then he also had 2 litter patients. They got ponchos and used bamboo and made litters, and they had to carry them. So the hatchet force, B Company, was being slowed quite a bit. Meanwhile, the word had gotten out that the Americans were there, and coming down the highway, they start bringing in reinforcements. There were trucks coming down. You you know, we weren't out there to shoot them. The Air Force would try, but the weather was too bad. So reinforcements were coming in. So the cat was getting bigger and the mouse was getting slower. So on the 12th, the next day, the Army decided they were going to try to get those 2 litter patients extracted and the worst of the walking wounded. They could run a medevac and get them out of there. So they went in and they had some Pink Panther Cobras and some Bikini Hueys. And you've had some, I know Bud's had some Pink Panther guys on, Woody Woodard, I believe. But anyhow, they went to tried to go in and had a Panther leading the way, and it was Major Henry was their new CO, who was in the front seat because he had just gotten there and was wanting to learn the neighborhood. And I forget the guy's name in the back seat. Anyhow, they're leading the Huey in, and they get shot down. So then the medevac's off, and it's an air crew rescue mission. So a guy named Bob Litwinski with bikinis came in and pulled them out of there. So that didn't work so well. Meanwhile, the hatchet force is running out of food and ammunition. Water, you know, you had your iodine tablets. You could you know, get some river water and throw a few tablets in and drink it and spit out the chunks. You were okay. But they're running low on ammo and food. And Mike Rose was getting covered up. By then he had a couple of dozen wounded, and half of the Americans were wounded or more. So things were getting bad. So then the next day, the 12th, on the 12th, they went to an RON site. RON means remain overnight. So you're looking for a place where you can spend the night. Yeah, they just call it an RON site. They found this place that was kind of an open area with a bomb crater in the middle. Mike put his wounded in the bomb crater, his worst wounded, and he's trying to set up IVs and do stuff like that. Meanwhile, in the woods surrounding it is where everyone else is positioned. So the enemy doesn't know exactly where the hatchet force is, and they launch a grenade attack, but they don't know exactly where it is. So these guys come walking through the jungle, and they would beat 2 bamboo, whoever's in charge would beat 2 bamboo sticks together. Bang it once, that means move forward. Then you bang it twice, it means throw your grenade. And then bang it 3 times, and it means turn around and go back. Well, no one's going to fire a weapon because the muzzle flash would give away your position. So it's, even though it's just 3 days from a full moon, it's black as a well digger's ass because it's a monsoon season with thick overcast and a triple canopy jungle out where these guys are. So they're in the utter darkness. They come throw it. Well, the special forces and the yards are there, and they'd hear them coming, and they'd throw grenades that way. And this grenade battle broke out, but nobody would fire their weapon because they didn't want to give away a position. Well, it went on most of the night. Then it stopped, and they heard trucks coming. They could hear them unloading crates. They were getting resupplied with more grenades, and then the NVA comes again. And there's a break in the action, and there's one, this is a little side story. A guy named Jimmy Lucas, I think he was a sergeant, Jimmy Lucas. His call sign, or they called them code names, was Little Caesar. He's a short guy, and he decides he's going to snatch himself an NVA prisoner. So this is just pitch blackness. No one knows where anybody else, but he crawls out of his foxhole, and he's sticking his hand out in front of him, feeling as he's silently crawling. He goes a little bit, and then he feels something, and it's an arm. He says, "Oh, I got one." So he starts pulling on this arm to drag this body back, and the guy's moaning a little, so he's wounded. He starts pulling him back, and all of a sudden, someone grabs the leg on the other end and pulls it in the other direction. So here's these guys, they're like 5 feet apart, and you can't see anything. It's pitch blackness. And Lucas says, I think maybe discretion is the better part of valor. And he lets go, and he slithers back to his foxhole. But I mean, what a crazy thing to do, but a great story. Later that night, they called in a Spectre gunship, AC-130, I guess it was, and they were putting fire around them, and it stopped the battle. But it was a long day on the 12th for them. We were back at Marble Mountain, and then they declared what's called a prairie fire. A prairie fire means it's an emergency. Americans in extremis, in danger. So we launched from Marble Mountain and went down, and this is the 13th. And they said we have to evacuate these litter patients and the most seriously wounded because they've lost their mobility and more reinforcements are coming in and the hatchet force can't move and they need ammo. So we by now we're down to 4 Cobras and 4 or 5 53s because the Marine brass was bitching a lot because the Army was getting our assets. We only had 1 squadron in the whole Marine Corps, and the Army was getting 6 of our Cobras. So anyhow, we go back down there, and it's supposed to be a medevac to get them out. Well, we come in, and a guy named Bill Beardall's flying the first CH-53, and he has a couple of Special Forces medics in the back, Doc Paget and Brown. So they come in, and the zone, I got a picture that I sent to Bud, too bad we can't see it, where they're chopping some trees down to make a bigger zone. And the zone wasn't quite big enough, but Bill comes in and he gets this 53, which is a big ass. It's like a semi, and it comes down vertically, and he's about 5 feet off the ground. And Mike Rose is handing up the first litter patient to Doc Paget. The first guy he's a Vietnamese lieutenant who has his femurs exposed. I mean, he took a big wound in the hip. So anyhow, he's handing up the first patient in the litter, and the withering fire starts hitting them. The helicopter blades start hitting the tree. They get severe vibrations, and they have to pull out. So they pull out, and they don't get the guy in the stretcher. They pull out, and they had some hydraulic systems and stuff shot out. So he goes just a few clicks, and he has to put it down. So now here's another medevac attempt, turns into an aircrew rescue again, just like the Army the day before. So they landed. Just as they landed, they pissed off the last of their hydraulic fluid, lost their controls. They all get out. Meanwhile, another CH-53 was set up as the search and rescue bird, and he had a ladder on the back. It's 3 steel cables come down with aluminum rungs on them. So it's like 80 feet long, maybe 100 feet long. They roll it out the back ramp and it hangs down. Couldn't land next to Beardall's craft. So they hovered next to it in the ladder. Everybody comes out, they clip onto the ladder, and they're pulling out. A lot of fire going on, a lot of small arms and some 50 cal fire, a lot of 50 cal fire, which is bad for a helicopter. We're hit tolerant for a lot of small arms, but 50 cals do damage. And anyhow, Mark McKenzie's the guy that's flying it. He's flying, and then he starts getting fluctuations on hydraulic pressure. And I said, oh God, now we're going to go down. And he's got these 9 guys hanging on this ladder below. Well, there's a picture, I wish you could see it, of these guys on the ladder. And this is an aside I got to pass on to you. There's Bill Beardall's the last guy on. And he sees the end of the ladder swinging like that, and he thinks, oh my God, this is going to swing up and hit the tail rotor, and we're all going to die. So he says, I'm going to climb down to anchor the end of the ladder. Good idea at the time. Bill Beardall weighed all of 140 pounds. He started climbing down, and it didn't do anything. He says, well, the hell with that idea. Anyhow, they're on this ladder, and they're losing the hydraulic pressure. So Mark McKenzie, the pilot, he finds another area in front of us, and we put down some 40. We have a 40 millimeter grenade launcher on the front of the Cobra, along with the minigun, and we put 40 out there. Usually we do that in an LZ in case there's booby traps or anything. Kind of prep the LZ a little, and Mark comes in and he just has to hover with the end of the ladder. So the first guy gets off, then go forward and kind of lay down this ladder. Everybody can get off. And then he lands. And meanwhile, the third 53 comes in, picks up all those guys. Meanwhile, Mark's cruise chief says, well, I think the thing can fly. Just leave the gear down in case we lose this one hydraulic system. So they took off and made it back. So we lost one 53. Fortunately, we didn't lose a second one that day. But we still weren't able to get the medevacs out and resupply them. And the hatchet force was getting into tough going because the NBA is growing and their mobility slowed. So the Air Force came up with this plan. Everybody's coming up with ideas to how to help them. And we're thinking we might have to use tear gas to get these guys out, or even to get in to resupply them and medevac. So the Air Force, one of the Covey pilots goes back to play cool, and they go into this warehouse and they get this big cargo parachute, and they load 3 duffel bags, one full of Claymore mines, one full of ammunition, and one full of gas masks. And they get these and they bundle them up and put this cargo parachute on it, and they put it in the back of an OB-10. So I had a picture of an OB-10. If you're not familiar with it, it's a 2-pilot thing, but they have this little cargo compartment behind the rear pilot, and there's a clamshell door you can take off. You could fit probably 5 people in there to jump out if you wanted. So they have this SOG guy they put in, and they say, we give you the word, I want you to kick this parachute out. So they come flying over Gene McCarley's hatchet force. And they say, okay, kick it out. So they kick out this thing to resupply them. Well, that parachute they got was an old dry rotted chute that'd been sitting on the shelf forever. The drogue chute comes out, which would pull out the main chute, and the drogue chute just disintegrates in a puff of green nylon. And the whole bundle lands on the hillside. And then they spend the rest of the day running airstrikes on it to keep it out of the NBA hands. So so it didn't work out. So the 13th was a bust. Then we came back on the 14th, and it was supposed to be a resupply and medevac once again, so Gene McCarley could get some mobility and have some ammunition. But when Covey and Covey Ryder showed up that morning, they looked and they saw how many NVA had arrived, and there were just truckloads were coming down the highway. And Covey Ryder told McCarley, said, you got to get out, and you got to get out now, because they were pretty much surrounded. And Mike Rose, he had been going out and dragging guys back that were wounded, and I mean, just heroic things he was doing. And he's reusing morphine syrettes. He's out of bandages. He's sharing drip lines. He's doing a horrendous job. But he had something like 50 people he's attending to. So it became, from a resupply and medevac, it became an extraction mission. And we were issued gas masks and said we'd run some tear gas on them. So that the A1s, if you're familiar with the A1, it's a propeller driven plane, but it can stay on station a long time and carry a lot of ordnance. There were supposed to be 6 of them out of NKP, a base in Thailand. Well, the first 2 went down for mechanical, the first 2 couldn't get anywhere because of weather. The second section of 2 launched. Then the third 2 went down because of mechanical problems. So instead of 6 gas birds, we were down to 2 gas birds. And one of them, the co-pilot, is a guy named Art Bishop, who had never flown. It was like his second mission in country. So he had some exciting stories to tell. Anyhow, when they were bringing these troops in, they were also on these trucks towing 37 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. So there was a lot of anti-air in the area. Now a 37 Mike can shoot down a fast mover at 10,000 feet. For a helicopter, doesn't mess with anti-aircraft guns like that. 37, 57 millimeters, you just don't. I mean, a 50 cal makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. and 37 millimeters, just deadly. So the weather had been really dog shit the whole time. We couldn't get any fast movers in. Only we got Spads in, and Spads saved their bacon. The morning of the 14th, McCarley's completely surrounded, and there's a section of Spads take off from Da Nang instead of Thailand, and they were able to get in. And golly, my mind's going blank. I mean, the guy should have got an Air Force Cross for it, but he didn't. But it was, I got to tell you his name. He's really worthy of a comment. He'd be a great guy to have on there. Tom Stump, an Air Force named Tom Stump. He and his wingmen were able to get in, and Gene McCarley's running them because I don't know that Covey could get in yet. The weather was that bad, but Tom Stump got in and kind of saved their bacon and broke. They were surrounded, and it broke the attack. They kept running CBUs and 20 millimeter and all that, and saved their bacon long enough for us to get there. Meanwhile, we're coming in, and as if by magic, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it, the skies parted. And so this is a prairie fire, and prairie fire means Americans in extremis, and drop what you're doing. We got to get these guys. So we had fast movers stacked up all the way to heaven. They had 2 Covey aircraft. There were so many fast movers. One guy up high to keep track of them all. And they say, okay, we want on these anti-aircraft guns, we want, napalm. So you come out of the stack and go down and drop napalm. Anyhow, we came in and brought in the first bird to pick them up. And the first aircraft came in and picked up most of the, all of the wounded. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to back up. The morning of the 14th, the hatchet force heard some dogs barking. So they go to the sound of the dogs, and they find this bunker complex, and there's just light resistance, and they overrun it. And it turns out to be a major headquarters of the NVA. So they go in there, and there's mess hall, one bunker, and another one's bunk room, and another's truck parts, and it's a big complex. But this one they call Gene McCarley, Captain McCarley, and he comes in and looks, and there's these trunks of documents everywhere. So he says, pack up all the documents you can, and we'll take them with us. So now the NVA are really pissed because they got this all their intelligence from this command headquarters. So anyhow, now they're ready to come out, and they're surrounded, and we bring in the first 53. So the first 53 gets all the documents that they got, plus the most severely wounded, and a whole bunch of yards jump on. There's a guy named Bernie Bright, Staff Sergeant, I believe he was, Bernie Bright. He's in the middle of this firefight, and he has a orange signal panel in his shirt, and he pulls it out, stands up, and holds this panel to say, here's where you want to land. Bullets going everywhere. First 53 puts his nose right next to Bernie. Bernie puts the panel back in his shirt, turns around, drops one knee, starts shooting at the bad guys. So that thing loads up, takes off. Second one's coming in. Bernie Bright stands up again, holds this orange panel, guides them in. Same thing happens. Now we put them in 4 aircraft, and Bernie's assuming they go out in 4 aircraft. But people were just piling on and piling them on. They were like sardines in a tin. They were just cram-packed in there. So the third one comes in. Bernie holds up his panel, turns around, he's shooting, and he sees Gene McCarley running, and he sees Mike Rose running, and the other Americans running for this aircraft, and he says, whoa, this might be the last ship out of Dodge. I better get on it. So fortunately, he saw that, and he ran along the side of the aircraft. He and Gene McCarley and I think Denver Minton were the last 3 to step on the ramp. And as they stepped on the ramp, 3 or 4 NVA come out of the elephant grass, just 20 feet from them, and they mowed them down. Because Gene McCarley told me several times, he used to go up to North Carolina, have lunch with him and his wife, and he'd say, I just don't know why they didn't throw a grenade right in the helicopter. They were that close, they could have easily done it. But anyhow, while the third 53's in the zone, one of its engines gets shot out. So it's loaded up. You don't have a perimeter anymore, and the NVA that surrounded them are collapsing. And a guy named Don Persky is flying it. So Persky takes off, and everybody's wearing gas masks on that aircraft. On our aircraft, we tried putting them on. And there are aviation gas masks, which allows you to plug into your intercom system so you can talk on the radio, and it has a microphone in it. And then there's the standard Mark 17 gas mask that you use. Well, they gave me and the guy I'm flying with standard Mark 17 gas mask. So we're heading in that way, took off our helmet, put these masks on, put the helmet back on. And it was painful because you have these metal buckles, and they're not meant for a form-fitting flight helmet, and it's digging in to my skull, and it's bringing tears to my eyes. Plus, I got a boom mic, and I tried holding it against my throat, and we're trying to talk that way, and we can't. So if you open the mask and you put it up under the mask, well, you broke the seal on the mask, so it was worthless. So we just took the masks off and threw them on the floor and said, to hell with it. And most of the other crews did too, even on the 53s. But on Persky's bird, they were wearing masks. So it's withering fire, horrendous fire. We're flying in a circle around them, the 4 Cobras. And out is the next circle. It's not a circle, it's the SPADs coming in, trying to keep the RPGs and the mortars and stuff down. And then outside of that are the fast movers coming in, dropping 500-pound bombs on these anti-aircraft guns and stuff like that. So it was like the hills were alive with the sound of, fire and stuff. It was an incredible thing. But Persky gently pulls it out on one engine, starts coming up, getting altitude. He got maybe 4,000 feet off the ground, and his crew chief in the back, God, I can't think. It was Snipes was his name. His crew chief in the back takes off his gas mask and pulls out a cigarette and starts to light a cigarette.
God.
Yeah, Gene McCarley and these guys start screaming at him. Now, it's very loud in the back, but they're screaming at him, waving their arms and saying, don't do that. They're pointing at the ceiling, and here's all this fuel running down.
Oh, God.
Because it had really got shot up bad. So it's, good thing you didn't light a match. The fuel's coming down. It wasn't long after that, the second engine quit. And then it got real quiet. So in war, there's a thing called the fog of war. And you can plan everything down to a gnat's ass, but there's always going to be confusion. There's always going to be things that don't go the way you plan it. And that's referred to as the fog of war. So the fog of war rears its ugly head. There was the right door gunner on Persky's 53 was a guy named Shaky Stevens, and he had taken a round through the neck. It was a magic bullet, went in one side, out the other, didn't hit his spine, his jugular, his arteries, nothing, but he's bleeding like a stuck pig. He's laying on the floor, and he has an open mic, so he's just gurgling into this mic. So Persky can't talk to anybody on the radio. Meanwhile, we don't know if there's more troops on the ground. We have the 4th 53 ready to come in, and we don't know if there's more troops on the ground or not. Our CO is a guy named Harry Sexton. He's trying to get Persky to see if you got the last of them, because we used 4 aircraft to put them in, and that Persky was only number 3. And we can't talk because Shaky Stevens has this wound, and he's just gargling with the wound in his neck. So Mike Rose, who was in the back, goes up to the front, and he takes off Stevens' helmet and starts treating him. He doesn't have any medicine or any bandages left. He just gets him to kneel, sort of stuff, and says, you're not going to die, basically. But that opened up the comm. But in the meantime, we had Dash 4 coming in, and he was on a short final. And if he got any closer, they would have been shot down because there were no Americans there. It was just all NBA. There were just hundreds of NBA. So fortunately, Doc Rose got the helmet off in time to Persky and Harry Sexton, our CO, to communicate and say, no, we got the last of them. And we pulled out of there just in the nick of time. Meanwhile, as I said, Persky's second engine quits. And on a helicopter, you don't have ejection seats. You do what's called an auto rotation. You lower the collective, which controls the pitch on your blades. You lower it so it's almost flat, and you're falling through the air, and it's like a pinwheel or a windmill. You know, when you blow on it, it turns blades. As you're falling through the air, the air going through the blades keeps them turning. So you have all this inertia, this energy. And then when you get down by the ground, you just flare the aircraft, pull pitch, and use that energy, and you get a one-time shot to land it. So you want to keep your turns up, your rotor RPM, we call it, keep your turns up. And Persky looks, he says, calls a mayday, mayday, lost my second engine, and waiting for a call, someone to say, hey, there's an LZ off to your right or off to your left, and there's nothing because it's just solid jungle, triple canopy jungle. So he sees a ridge line and he elects to see what's on the other side of the ridge line, which means he had to bleed off a little bit of his rotor RPM, his turns. And he got over this ridge line, and here's this river valley, and it's kind of steep going down. So he dives in the valley. We dove in after him, and he's going down there, but he doesn't have 100% rotor turns. There's a river down there. It gets near the bottom. There's kind of a sloped, sandy sort of area next to the river where another stream cuts up and a big rock there. And he makes an auto rotation, but he doesn't have enough energy in his system, and they hit really hard. The aircraft breaks in half. It rolls over. People are thrown every which way. And unfortunately, one of the yards was thrown underneath, and his head got crushed. He was killed. But so now we got another air crew rescue going on. We brought in another 53. There's no place to land. He kind of hovered over the river with one wheel on the river bank and another on a rock, and the nose being held in the air. And Mike Rose goes back into the aircraft and starts, and Gene McCarley, and they start throwing people out, you know, bucket brigade style, leading them out, and everybody's dazed and messed up, and they all get on this other aircraft. It's laying on its side, so it's 90 degrees from where it was after it rolled over. And the co-pilot was a guy named Bill Batty. Well, Bill Batty ended up on the crash, breaking his back, but they get out the window and he's laying in the grass and he can't move. And he's thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get, you know, it's 50 yards or something to that. And he can't move. And Batty said, some little Montagnard. We used to call them little people because Asians are smaller than Westerners. And some of them are just, he said, this kid, he looked like he was a 12-year-old kid, but he, of course, wasn't that young. He said, you just picked up Batty like he was a sack of potatoes and grabbed him and threw him in the other aircraft. So Bill Batty, you know, spent a long time in the hospital, but he survived. But everybody get on except for the one guy that, and actually his name was Shay, or his nickname was Shay. He was the right-hand man to Jimmy Lucas, the guy that tried to sneak out and snatch the prisoner on the 12th. Each American had 1 yard assigned to him, kind of like as a right-hand man, and that was Che who got killed on that. So anyhow, we got everybody on board, pulled pitch, and got the hell out of there, and headed for the ranch. And that was the end of Operation Tailwind.
Wow, I've already excuse me. I've already gotten numerous comments saying, "Wow, what a storyteller!" and that was amazing getting to hear it straight from you. And all of your research. But first thing that always strikes me when not only from reading the book, but also hearing you with Dr. Dick Thompson when you were speaking with Rob Graham and the guys. Um, you had mentioned Mr. Bernie Bright holding up the uh the signal
Panel.
panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was amazing. Was that, is that correct? He did that 3 or was it 4
Three
times?
times.
He
Three
3
times.
times.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, that's what I thought. And he can, and each time he'd start shooting. And I was about to go through and let people know about the awards, but do you know if he won an award? I don't see him listed for winning an award.
I don't know. I assumed he got a silver star for that. He certainly should have. uh, yeah, I'd have to dig into my research on that one.
I'll look that up because absolutely, he most definitely should. And it says several. There were numerous other bronze and several other meritorious medals
Yeah.
all throughout. So I'll check that out. But that's one heck of a story. Him getting those birds in like that, holding it up. I mean,
Yes, that was it. I mean,
it's
crazy.
um, before we get to questions, I just wanted folks to know a lot of this great photos will be involved the next time we talk, so we can cover all of this again, and y'all can get some good photos of the folks. But just to let y'all know, just on the tidbit from Mr. Barry's wonderful book that y'all could get the link in the show description. You've got Lieutenant Colonel Sexton. He received the Navy Cross for his insert, extract, and rescue operation of the 2 CH-53s. Captain Gene McCarley was a Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts. Many believed he should have received much higher than that. Lieutenant Van Buskirk, Manuel Orozco, Spec 4 Craig Schmidt were all awarded Silver Stars. Van Buskirk also received 2 Purple Hearts, Orozco 1 Purple Heart, and Schmidt 3 Purple Hearts during this mission. Specialist 5th Class James Lucas received the Silver Star for his attempt to snatch a NBA prisoner. He also received a Purple Heart. It's and it also says all the SOG Americans and 33 yards were wounded multiple times. So just to let y'all know what the guys on the ground were dealing with, and Mr. Barry got into that very well with what Mr. Mike Rose was going through, having to reuse stuff, tear stuff off his uniform, or get stuff off of the wounded, and make tourniquets and stuff like that. It's really amazing what the guys were doing. I'll get to some of the questions, and I'll get to some of mine since y'all have been so patient with me. Let's see here. Tell me if you can see this, Mr. Barry. If not, I'll read it.
Yeah, the electromechanical gun sight turret gun. the turret, as I said, we had side controls because the sight, it was mounted on the pedal, so you'd take it off, and it was gimbaled. You could move it left and right, or you could turn it up and down. And everywhere you turned it, the turret would follow. So you'd turn to the left, and the turret go left. You point up, down, and it had locks on it, so you couldn't shoot your own rotor blades, of course. But so that's what took up all the room in the cockpit. It had a sight in the middle that you'd use. It had a trigger for the minigun, and you'd pull it halfway to the first indent. I believe it was 2,000 rounds a minute, and pull it all the way, and it was 4,000 rounds a minute. And it could just go like that. And every fifth round's a tracer, so you could kind of see them coming out and walk it. Now the 40 millimeter grenade launcher we called it the chunker. It would go boom, 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 boom like that. So if you shot it off to the left, it had some kick to it because the nose of the aircraft would go boom, 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 boom when you're doing that. But it could shoot 400 rounds a minute on the chunker. And then we had wing stores, which we had two 19-shot pods inboard and two 7-shot pods outboard. The wing stores were generally fired from the back seat, the turret from the front seat, because you had the sight to control it. In an emergency, you could fire the turret from the back seat, but only in the stowed mode, straight ahead. So you could you could kind of strafe with it, or you had an override switch in the front. You could fire the rockets from the front seat, but you didn't have a sight for it. You'd kind of use Kentucky windage. You know, you'd shoot one, put a mark on the windscreen with a grease pencil, and then shoot another and hope it went in about the same neck of the woods. But it was more an area weapon than it wasn't a precision guided weapon. But it was a great system. And then later on, for the Marine Corps, anyhow, we got a AH-1J, a twin engine model, and they did away with the dual turret of the minigun in the 40, and it had a 20 millimeter 3-barrel cannon that shot 750 rounds a minute, but it wasn't ball ammunition. Each round would explode, was HE.
Oh.
So that's what it evolved to.
I've got a few questions on that. Did you happen to fly one of those, or was that much later after Vietnam when they got the cannon turret?
Oh no, I flew the J model also for quite a while, and years later, after I get out of the Marine Corps, went back to school, and then I ended up working for. I got hired by Bell Helicopter to go to Iran to be an instructor with the Iranian army, because the Shah of Iran at the time, this before the revolution, bought 202 J model Cobras, and the Marine Corps was the only one that had the J model. So they went recruiting all the people that had flown in the last year or so, and I ended up over there in the sandbox for a while. But the J model was a good aircraft, and then it was upgraded to the T model. And then it went to the W, the Whiskey, and now the latest one, the Marine Corps is still flying the Cobras, is the Z, the Zulu, and it's a 4-bladed rotor system. I mean, we were max of 8,500 pounds, and the modern Cobra now probably is, I would guess, 18,000 pounds. You know, it's bigger. It has flare, chaff and flares and radar sensors and all latest technology. But the Army went on to the Apache and didn't, they upgraded the Cobra to an S model, and then they went to the Apache. But the Marine Corps kept the Cobra to this day.
Wow. And I've got a question coming up on the armaments, but a lot of people don't realize, and I tried to share a few photos of your Cobras and some of the other Scarface Cobras that were parked. People don't realize how narrow those bad boys were in Vietnam. I mean, you know, you picture the Huey being so wide and having all that room, and you know, the Cobra is a sleek fighting machine.
I just happen to have one.
Oh wow! Okay.
A former Scarface pilot who's a sculptor out in Utah, Mark Bird, and he does warbirds. But you can get an idea, I guess, if I held it here.
Oh, that's good. It's perfect right there. You can see
it's a narrow silhouette coming at you, and there's the side of it. But if it's coming at you, you know, it's a pretty narrow silhouette to shoot at. It's a kind of small.
Absolutely. I mean, that I didn't realize until recently when I was speaking with Woody that just how narrow they were.
I think it was maybe 39 inches at the widest part of the cockpit where the canopy went out. So inside you were something less than that inside. So it was a small target.
Oh yeah. Before I get to the viewer questions, what you mentioned your rocket pods and everything. What kind of rockets were y'all using? Did y'all have any specialty rockets, or were they all HE, or what were you?
Most of the time we would carry 10-pound warheads. They were HE. And we would usually have one of the 7-shot pods with, we call it Willie Pete. It's white phosphorus smoke, because if you had to mark a target or try to put down a smoke screen, you would want Willie Pete's. For Tailwind, if you could, there was one of the pictures I sent you showed the Scarface Cobra in the hangar, and they wrote out the word Scarface in ammunition, and it had all the different rockets there. The 10-pound HE warhead was standard load, and usually one pod of Willie P. But for Tailwind, our inside pods, we carried a heavier. It was called a 17-pound warhead. We just called them 17-pounders. I don't know what the nomenclature was exactly for it, but we had that. We also had the rockets on the 7th that we were trying to borrow from the Army were called flechettes. Flechette rocket has nails in it. There were either 20 grain or 60 grain nails. They were like little darts, metal darts about this big. Some were that big, and there was others that were that big. I forget how many thousand it had. You either got the big ones or the small ones. But a flechette, the rocket, you'd shoot the rocket, and that rocket motor burnout, which was maybe 1.6 seconds or 1.9, the warhead would explode, and it would shoot out like 2,000 nails, or these little darts. But flechettes is what they're called. We called nails. But they say you could like nail a man to a tree with it, and it would go through like the fender of a Jeep or something. It wouldn't penetrate a block, but it was a great weapon for troops in the open, because it would, like a shotgun, you'd go out and you'd have buckshot, but these are little flechettes going out. And I think there were 2,000 of them in a warhead. So for troops in the open, it was a great thing, but we couldn't hardly get them. And we saw some there at Docto. We decided to borrow a few, but that didn't work out so well. Another weapon we had, it was, if you looked at those the rockets laying on the ground, there's one with a conical kind of pink cone-shaped head to it. And it was a proximity fuse, and it had a sensor in there. And usually HEs, when they hit something, they would explode. A proximity fuse would hit before it got there. It could sense, I don't know what the technology of it was, but as it got so close to a target, it would explode. So, sometimes you don't want the thing to bury in the mud and then explode. You want it to explode as it approaches the target. So sometimes we'd have these with the proximity fuses. I don't remember the nomenclature of exactly what they were called, but 90 some percent of the time we had 10-pound warheads and a pot of smoke. At Tailwind, we did 17-pounders.
What did you find to be most effective when you were using the rockets?
Oh, the 17-pounder was like it was probably like a 105 artillery round. It was a big boom. It gave you some firepower, But again, these are rockets. These are not guided munitions like a Hellfire missile and stuff like that. So it's an area target. But a big boom lays out a lot of shrapnel if you're close. It would work. They're good. You wouldn't use rockets if you're doing like on a close-in fire support mission, where you would never overfly. If here's your line of troops, you would never overfly the line. You want to go parallel to them, because you're more likely to make an error long or short than you are left or right, for rockets. But you got to be careful shooting rockets close to the troops, because it goes out and it's, plus or minus 100 yards or 50 yards. The minigun, you could be really accurate with the minigun and put it down.
Oh yeah, I remember you and Dr. Dick Thompson speaking about that very thing. You being able to get the minigun, danger close to where the guys could actually see it ricocheting, off into trees and stuff. So.
Yeah.
Guys, you may remember when we interviewed Woody, he actually sent me some flechettes, one flechette and a signed Pink Panther card
Yeah,
And I may go get it in a minute, but I did have that on there, and if I'm not mistaken, there were 2,200 in each rocket,
yeah,
and they would come out. I forgot what he said at what rate, but it exactly. I like to say they could bush hog the area.
yeah. It
That's
was
what they
it
do.
was just like a shotgun. The warhead would explode and 2,200 or whatever would come out. And there were big ones and small ones.
Hmm.
You had one or the other. So one might be, I don't know, 1,500 and the other 2,500 or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah. You get the ones that are, let me get up close. One's about like that, and then you get the ones that
yeah,
are almost
exactly.
like a mini dart that you throw
Yeah,
at the bar,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. The
Um,
flechettes, that was a great weapon if you found troops in the open. It was super.
absolutely. Same with the M79s
Oh
that have
yeah.
the flechettes. That's heavy duty. Here's a viewer question. Sorry if I missed it. I was busy with work. Do we know the total amount of aircraft used for Op Tailwind and how many were shot down?
Yeah, we had two CH-53s shot down and
Mhm.
one Army Cobra shot down on the helicopter side of the house. We had a whole bunch of them shot up, and either you'd have to tow them back to maintenance or whatever. But only three aircraft were shot down on Tailwind. Fixed wing losses, not that I know of. I mean,
Um,
like when they dropped the gas bird was having problems. They had to go back to Da Nang, couldn't make it back to Thailand. But I don't think anybody was shot down and had a punch out.
no, there were some oil leaks and hydraulic issues, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, but no outright shoot down, so to speak. Um, let's see. Here we go. How much ammo did you carry for the minigun and the 40 millimeter and the Cobra?
We had a drum for the 40 and it had 400 rounds in it on a belt. So that was 1 minute's worth. But usually we'd go like boom, 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 boom. And then you go boom, 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 boom. And you had a little meter to tell you, had a ammo counter roughly how much you had left. On the minigun, I want to say it was 6,000 rounds, but my memory, that's a 50-year-old memory. So I'm thinking we carried 6,000 rounds it was in a big box, all linked together. But I think it was 6,000.
Wow, that's a lot of bad news for the enemy went with y'all. uh, let's see. Um, did you guys ever drop smoke for ground teams or
Never did.
use?
Now,
No.
now there was a switch on the Cobra that said smoke dispenser. Never saw it used. Don't even know what a smoke dispenser would look like on a Cobra. But we never did. That's the
Okay.
smoke situation. You may have had this before if you like when you talk to Dick and stuff. Uh, on any mission, well, not on Tailwind because they were in extremis, but usually if you're going into a zone, you'd have them pop a smoke. And so they throw a smoke out, but you would never say, Papa, give me a red smoke, because the enemy's listening in, and all of a sudden you get a red smoke over there, and you'd land in their backyard if you saw that one first. So they'd pop a colored smoke, and then you'd identify the color and say, yeah, I've got the yellow, I've got the red or violet or whatever. But yeah, we never dropped smokes. If we wanted to mark something, we'd use a Willie Pete round. If we're calling in fast movers, we could do forward air control from a Cobra, but we rarely did it. But you could mark a target with the Willie Pete and then say, okay, from that mark, 500 yards or 200 yards left or right or whatever.
Gosh, there was something I was about to ask you and I just went blank. I'll let this question until I think about it. Um, a friend of mine from basic training is in basic training as a warrant officer flying the Apache. What are your opinions on that helicopter?
I've never flown in an Apache, but I think it's a heck of a helicopter. A little history. the story when the Apache first came out, the Marine Corps was going to buy it. But the Marine Corps is a maritime service, and we operate off of ships often. So what it was going to be at the time, and this was, I guess, in the 80s or whenever it came out, we were going to have to buy a finished one off the production line, the Army production line, then send it back through the production line to replace the transmission, because you need different metallurgy that would resist salt water, corrosion, and there was a whole stuff. You'd have to send it back and replace a lot of components, and the cost was going to be exorbitant. So that's why the Marine Corps never went into the Apache. It's a great helicopter. I mean, the Zulu Cobras now has the same ability as the Apache, I suspect. But yeah, the Apache was great. The Marine Corps just couldn't afford it.
Wow, that's I've just remembered what I was going to ask you before we get into some more of the Vietnam Tailwind stuff. You had another mission that I found super interesting besides the missions you laid out. I believe it was mission 71, Sniffer missions that you.
A Sniffer mission, yes.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not, and that's in those slides I gave you from that Veterans Day presentation. I think there's a slide in there that talks about the Sniffer mission. Now, someone developed a technology to sniff the air, and it's looking for ammonia and components of ammonia, which would be released from human sweat and urine. So we used to go out. I only flew it a few times, and there'd be a Huey with this contraption inside, and this big hose would hang down, and they'd fly slow at treetop level right over the jungle. And this guy in the back's taking readings, and he's calling out these numbers. And if it's we had to stay close to them, because when they're low and slow right at treetop level, they could get shot in a heartbeat. So we stayed right with them, ready to return fire if they took any fire. But they'd sniff the air, and if they get high concentrations of ammonia, they'd say, well, that's a lot of people, be it's urine and sweat. And they could call in an artillery strike or have someone drop bombs on that area or something. But, you know, animals, monkeys also give off ammonia. They pee too, you know. So who knows how many families of monkeys were wiped out, you know, because of a high reading from a Sniffer mission. And the NVA got kind of clever also. They would get buckets of mud, and they pee in the buckets, and it was dirt and urine mixed, and they'd hang these buckets in the tree, and then they'd go somewhere else. So if a sniffer bird came by, you'd sniff this stuff and say, okay, call an airstrike in on these buckets of crap, you know, of mud. So I don't think it was a very effective thing. It was kind of unique, though. I thought it was really interesting, but I don't think much came of it.
Wow, that's there's the guys. If you don't have his book, it's very interesting. Getting the perspective of his Marine work as well as his work during Tailwind, but also the last part of the book is devoted to debunking and showing the fatal flaws in the CNN debacle that they put out, trying to denigrate these men, and we'll get into a bit of that later on. But before I get to another viewer question, I was curious if you could inform me and the readers a little bit on Shit River at Olampongo, I believe.
Longapo. I don't know what the river was. You know, when you leave the base at Subic Bay, you'd go into the Longapo City, Post City. You'd cross this bridge, and we just call it Shit River. But they'd have these dugout canoes with these young maidens in them with like a wire basket, and they were usually dressed in gowns or sometimes white gowns, and they'd want you to throw coins, and they'd catch them, and you know, they were kind of begging. But it was an interesting situation. So you'd throw the coins, and they'd catch them with this basket. But what you try to do is throw it far enough away so they had to reach and maybe fall out of the boat. But if they didn't catch it and it went in the water, sometimes there was a little kid in this dugout canoe dive into the river. It wasn't that wide a river, and he half the time come up with a coin, which is just amazing to me. I mean, it was dirty water, and how you're going to find a coin. But yeah, it used to, Olongapo was back then was probably a very nice town. Now it was the Wild West because the fleet was there. I guess it was the Seventh Fleet, maybe, or Fifth Fleet, whatever the Pacific Fleet was. And when they came into town, here all of a sudden thousands of Americans descend on this little town, and it's just full of bars and brothels and places to get in trouble. It was a real bunk place.
Wow, that was very interesting. I've actually read about that in a Force Recon book when he was in the same area, and I believe he was describing the same shit river. In fact, and I was curious reading also, guys. I've got your questions. I'm gonna get to where. Gosh, I just lost it. Hang on one second. Oh, the lieutenant colonel. When you ended up first getting into Vietnam, I think you had already gotten to Marble Mountain Air Base, which is a question in itself. But Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Block, I believe.
Okay, he was the
Did
CO of the 53 Squadron.
Okay, yeah, and was I've not heard of any of this before. Before you speak about it, what were his barrel bomb missions and stuff he was doing?
Well, he was an innovative guy. You see, the CH-50, the Marine Corps was much smaller than the Army. So
Hmm.
CH-53 was very expensive, and they used it like a semi. They'd want it to go in safe areas, pick up big loads, take it from point A to point B. They didn't want to risk them and get them shot up. And the Marine brass were really pissed when we lost two of them on Tailwind because they were very expensive and were a small service. But Charlie Block was an innovator, and he got permission to try some stuff. And one was barrel bombing, and they just had a cargo net and 55-gallon drums, and they'd put napalm in these drums and go out and find the enemy, and then you'd pickle the load. The net, you just drop it, and all these barrels would come out. And
Wow.
if you had to, you'd shoot a rocket to explode it, but usually they go and explode. I mean, he was an innovator. It wasn't a real
Abs-
successful thing, but also tried some flying. FLIR is forward-looking infrared. This is before the days of night vision goggles, and they put a FLIR camera on a 53. And we'd go out at night in the dark. You turn all your lights off, and we had some rotor blade lights that were just on the top, so you could see them if you're flying above somebody, but you couldn't see them from the ground. And they'd go out flying along with this FLIR, and they had a screen, and it was a heat sensing camera. And if they picked up a bunch of people, sitting around eating or something, they'd say, okay, get ready, we got them. And we'd be into position, and they'd have a big searchlight, and they'd turn on the searchlight, shine it on these guys, and we'd open fire on them as soon as we could. I mean, it was kind of experimenting with stuff. He was an innovator.
wow.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
today we have night vision goggles and all this stuff you can see in the dark, but back then we couldn't.
he's ahead of his time. That's some interesting stuff right there. I found that part very interesting. Here's a viewer question. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Did the Cobra have, oh, sorry about that. Did the Cobra have IR/camera zoom daylight sighting systems?
No, we didn't. That later on, that's newer technology. We just had a sight. You just had a little piece of glass with a reticle on it. We had no cameras whatsoever, no zoom capability, nothing like that.
Okay. Baz is an Afghanistan veteran, and he said on one occasion we had a Super Cobra create a wall of smoke for us.
Yeah, well, that's the Willie Pete's. So sometimes, you could put down a smoke screen and you just shoot out a bunch of Willie Pete's, and each one gives a big puff of white smoke, and you'd shoot it down. You could lay out a smoke screen with the Willie Pete's.
Wow. I can't imagine. I mean, I see it now, especially with Ukraine going on. And, I can only imagine. And there's select clips of some Willie Pete going off in Vietnam, but I can only imagine what that was wreaking havoc when y'all were launching Willie Peter at the NVA like that. I can't imagine.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily shoot it at people. You do it either to
Yeah,
mark the target so
Mark.
fast movies could see it, or a smoke screen. But it was a versatile thing to have. I mean, if
Oh
you had
yeah.
to, you could shoot it at somebody. I wouldn't want to get hit with the white phosphorus round and burn you up.
Oh yeah. Oh, that I mean, nasty, nasty stuff. What was it like for you when you first got in country and when you got to Marble Mountain and you finally figured out what your job was going to be? What was that like?
Well, it was just a progression. As I tried to say before, when I first got there, it was on the job training to get checked out on the Cobra. And as time went on, you got more and more experience, and then they put you in the back seat, and you get a check ride for your competence there, and then and you started to develop an eye for people and movement on the ground. It's just an experience. You can't beat experience. So when you're a new guy, you got the deer in the headlights look, and you don't have a clue what's going on. After you're there a few months, you start to understand a whole lot more. There's a steep learning curve, and it just comes to you because you were flying 7 days a week, so you stayed busy.
Wow. It's always interesting to and that's why I've been glad to be able to and glad you were open to come talk to us because here lately we've sadly only had recon men and I've had my computer issues here that I'm hoping to get resolved. So it's always nice to get y'all's point of view on what was going on, especially when you were working with SOG. It's just extremely interesting. Jason, I believe we've already spoken a little bit about the flechette rounds. Here we go. This is a good question by Tyler. I'll read it. It's not coming. There we go. What type of survival gear were pilots carrying at the time? And I guess you could say, what was your loadout, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, we had a standard survival vest, and in the survival vest, you had, some bandages. You had some like charm candies was supposed to be sugar for you. You had a survival radio. We had a 38 caliber pistol with these star cluster rounds that were supposed to be able to penetrate the triple canopy jungle and signal your position. Standard weapon that I would carry would be a 45 for a sidearm, but in the survival vest there was a 38, and then there were these pen light flares. There were just little things like that, and you had a little tube this long. You'd spring load it, you'd go that, and you'd shoot it, and could shoot a flare to mark your position. And the standard stuff, signal mirrors and bandages and things like that. It was nothing fancy. When we went across the fence, we would also wear a harness in case we had to get, hoisted out on a spy rig or hook onto a ladder. You had a harness with a D-link on it, like a carabiner sort of, and you could hook on to things. And I'd carry a big triangular green. I could use it as a tourniquet or a bandage or a headscarf if I wanted. I'd carry that just in case I needed a tourniquet. And then your weapon, we could. I carried a grease gun just because it was small, would fit in the cockpit, and it was simplest thing I could find that wasn't going to jam in the mud or anything. Early on, the M16s had some issues with firing, so I just we used to. Most guys carried an M16, and the armorers would cut it down so it was only about this long because there's limited room in the cockpit. on a Cobra, so you couldn't carry a full-size weapon. So I carried a grease gun and a 45. But survival equipment, you didn't have a whole lot because you always had a wingman with you, and you know, that was about it. Just a little survival vest, radio. The radio, it's not like today where it's digital. If you went down and you, wow, this is kind of interesting just because it's old school. The radio had a speaker on it about this big around. So you didn't have any thing where you could plug a jack in, but you had a tube about, oh, I guess this long with an earplug on one end and a little cup on the other with a rubber band or an elastic band. And you could put it over the survival radio, put that cup over the little speaker, and it would run through the tube to your ear. So you could hear and the bad guys couldn't. I just wonder how effective that thing would have been.
God, that's some definitely old school technology right there for you. I know, and I did actually, guys, if you follow my Instagram by chance, I have shared a photo of Mr. Barry, and he has a grease gun slung under his shoulder. He's actually getting ready to go on a flight, so you can actually see his weapon with him. Great photo, and like I said, guys, we'll definitely be having him back to for him to go over all these great photos that we've been speaking about and the ones we haven't shown. Did you work with U.S. Air Force air controllers? Thanks for taking the time to speak about your experiences today.
Not very often. We had, if we were being controlled, there were Marine OB-10 squadrons, and it was usually a Marine OB-10. Usually we just worked directly, like for close-in fire support and all that. We would just talk directly to the guys on the ground, the grunts on the ground, and they'd tell us where they wanted. The facts mostly controlled fast movers. You know, to tell them, you know, mark the target and tell them where to put it in. We would generally work with the person on the ground, or maybe there might once in a while worked with the Marine OB-10 and they told us where they needed something, but usually just talk to the unit on the ground that you're supporting.
Wow, excellent. That's right on the money. Tyler is wondering or saying, thank you, Mr. Penczek, for taking time. Those vests were mesh, right? Very cool choice of weapons. I still have one of those earpieces. The answer is not very well, LOL, meaning how they work.
Yeah. The vests we had were not mesh. It was just, actually, it was just went around your waist and had straps. It wasn't a full vest like this. It just went around your waist. I wonder if well, there might be a picture of one of them in the stuff I sent you, but it just went around your waist, these pouches around your waist, and it had straps that went up and over your shoulder. So it wasn't like a vest you slid on.
There is, and I'll, like I said, guys, I'll either share some of those or just hold on to them to where Mr. Barry can go into full detail on them, because we've got he's got, I should say, some amazing photos. Let's see, don't know if this has been asked. Let's see. In a pinch, did anyone ever get on the skids of a Cobra to be exfilled?
Well, there was a situation, a squadron mate of mine named Dave Cummings, who passed away a number of years ago, but he had been a grunt and then went back and became a pilot. And there was a medevac where there was a wounded Marine, and the medevac birds couldn't get in. And he and another guy were flying. Dave was in the front seat, and they managed to climb up to the top of this mountain it was bad weather, you know, and they got in there and landed, and Dave got out and they got the wounded Marine and put him in the front of the Cobra in the front seat. Now, Dave didn't ride the skids out. He went and straddled a rocket pod.
Oh.
there's a painting of Dave Cummins on this rocket pod, and there's a famous story about it. But he's straddled, facing backwards, hanging over the stub wing, straddling this rocket pod, and they took out and they went right to the medevac place, and I think the kid lived. But yeah, I don't know of anybody standing on the skids. We had ammo bay doors on each side of the Cobra. Would be like right here, and on this side, and they folded down, and they'd fold open and fold down like this, and you could actually sit two people on each side, and they could put their feet on the skids. There weren't any seat belts or anything, but or they could stand there, and if you opened your canopy, they could hang onto your seat, I suppose. But yeah, I never picked, and I came close, but I never picked anybody up on the skids.
There is a famous photo. It's not of your Mr. Cummings on the rocket pod, but there is a famous photo of a Cobra with two other pilots on the ammo bay doors that have been flipped out. A very, very famous. Next time you're on, I'll have that on, and and that'll be a picture we'll share. Guys, part 2 will be just as good when we have all these photos that we can go over. Jason has a great photo or great question. Did you carry any personal items with you when you flew? Maybe any good luck charms or something that meant a lot to you?
Wow. Golly, that's a great question, Jason. I don't remember if I had a superstitious, lucky charm or anything like that. I honestly don't. Nothing comes to mind. You'd have family pictures in your wallet when you flew, unless you were going across the fence and you had to go sterile. But yeah, I don't remember any lucky charm.
I'd be interested if you to brainstorm on that and think about that. That kind of reminds me of the part in the book to where when you're first getting started and God forbid you go down and are captured and they've got a radio saying it's you, and you've got the special code words like what's your favorite football team? What's your favorite food and all of that? I thought that was very interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, they spoke English too, and they could get on the radio and say, "Hey, I'm a wounded American. Come pick me up," and it could be a trap.
Yeah, absolutely, and some of those were very good because there's no way NBA is going to know anything like that because some of them were good. The food and football team questions and stuff like that, very good. Here's a great question by David. Did you ever work together with any Loaches / white and pink teams?
I flew. Didn't do the white and pink teams. We used to have a mission called a Rocket Belt VR. Now, Da Nang was a huge air base, miles across, and maybe 15 clicks out from Da Nang, there was like a belt where you could set up these 122 millimeter Katusha rockets. So at night they could set up a rocket. All you need is a stick that's a V, and you lay the rocket in there, and you could kind of guess the angle to hit Da Nang because it was miles across. You might hit an ammo dump, you might hit an airplane, you might hit an empty field. But we'd go out at sunrise when the sun came up and looking about, I want to say it was 15 kilometers, it might have been more or less, and flying along looking for maybe some rocket set up and pointed toward the airbase. I did that once with an Army Loach, and it ended up getting shot down. As a matter of fact, it's a long story, and I think I've been winded long enough. But,
yeah,
I did fly. There wasn't a white and a pink team. It was just one Loach. And
we can save that if you want to for part 2. That'll be a good one for part two. Yeah. We're coming up on 2 hours now, and I've got one more question, and maybe if one more viewer question pops in, I'll get it before we end. But please don't let me. My mind have gone blank here. Oh, I'm surprised this question hasn't come up. But you being a pilot, people may not think about it. But usually people ask, did you have any strange interactions with any animals or people or anything like that? And you sent me a great photo of one interaction with the CCC mascot, the big python.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we'll save that. There's a story behind that too that's kind of funny. We'll
Okay,
save it for the next.
okay,
I
that'll be
think,
perfect.
we're 2 hours now. I apologize for being so
No,
long-winded, but the 4 days, there's a lot of stories within the 4 days of Tailwind. I wanted to get most of them out.
absolutely, and that's what we were wanting to do, and all that. And like I said, that's going to be a great for part two, along with the photos. So, is there anything else you'd like to add before
No,
we
not at
we close
all.
it down?
Nope. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, Bud, and stay safe.
Absolutely. And like I said, as soon as I get everything up and running and get to where we can do photo sharing and the like, we'll get you back on and have a great part two with photos and some more stories.
Okay. Thank you
But
much.
yes, sir. You have a good day, and you just have to hit the leave studio button, and you're out of here.
The studio. I got it. Okay. Well, take care, Bud. I'll be talking to you.
Yes, sir. See you later.
So long.
Bye bye. Bye bye. All righty, guys. Dang, I'm sorry, Brady. I'll let him know. I'll email him when I let him know how the figures are coming. I think it was a great show. It was on the phone, and again, guys, I am terribly, 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 terribly sorry I didn't have photos for all of this stuff that was going on because I've got Tailwind photos. I've got team, the Americans that were on Tailwind. I've got Tailwind on the ground photos. I've got his PowerPoint that had photos. So I feel like an absolute turd in the punch bowl for doing for that not having any photos to be able to be shared or be able to be shared today. That really bummed me out, and I know that was a huge letdown. But we do have Doc Paget, that's him at Contoom, way before Tailwind. Um, uh, we'll get that on the second one for sure, David. I'm sorry. We'll get that one. And that right there, that is sadly we didn't even talk. We'll talk about Mike Hagan next time. That's on this farthest on the what is that left right y'all's left or right on the far end, the big tall lanky young guy is Michael Hagan, who just passed away. Guy in the black is Doc Paget, and the gentleman in the on the far end opposite of Mike Hagan is the other medic with Doc Paget. Blanking on his name, but I figured I'd at least show y'all some photos. I've got the Patreon up to a few posts. I've shared some photos, some never before seen photos of Walt Shoemate, and the Patreon. I meant the PayPal will be up. I didn't have it up today in the thing, but the Patreon is up as well. Patreon and PayPal are up. And like I said, I'll be getting the computer stuff fixed. And I apologize about not being able to share photos. That really bummed me out. But I wanted to get a podcast out to y'all, to where y'all could at least hear these great stories and all of that. And then that kind of gives us a doorway in to a part two, since he right then stopped with two stories and all of that. So I just want to apologize about that again, not having the capability to share photos, but we'll have a part two that'll be awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I hope it turned out well. I thought it went very well. Um, Thanks, Jason. That means a lot. I agree. I think him and Woody would have a great. As soon as I get my internet, we're gonna have lots of multiple people together, and we'll definitely have those two on. One Army, one Marine Cobra pilot, Cobra pilots. That'll be absolutely awesome. Um, but you know, you guys let me know what's up. I hope everything went well considering. And again, I apologize for not being able to share some awesome photos, but we did get a good tailwind rundown and some great stuff. I thought I'll be anxious to see what the boat. Yeah, I'll be in touch with y'all here after a while on Instagram and Twitter. So y'all be good, and I'll see y'all after a while. Thanks, man. Daniel, Panama, Brad, all of y'all are great. Jason, David, Klaus, nice to have you aboard this time. Brady, as always, thank you, man. Um, who else we got? Tyler, great to have you in. Dalai, I can't read that. I'm sorry. Thanks for joining us this time. Baz, great to have you as usual. Um, I know Cool Hand Luke, great to have you, man. Um, Kev B, nice having you in here with us. Cadden back for a while. Miller's Marauders, all of y'all. Thank you all much. Y'all have a wonderful rest of y'all's Thursday. And we might do a little live stream Friday night or Saturday night. So I'll give y'all heads up. See ya.